Hello everyone. Ryan kind of stole my first paragraph there because I was going to talk about the previous story and just warn you all that this is a very different story. I'm sharing this story, I guess, partly out of a selfish search for catharsis, and partly because I hope that from a period of my life that had a lot of sadness in it, that there is something to be drawn out, some lesson to perhaps come out of that rubble and be nursed back to health and shared for the common good. So, my father was a remarkable man. He loved computers, and he loved logic problems, and he loved cryptic crosswords. He was quite quiet, and yet you could hear his laugh from the other side of the building. His favourite game was a computer role-playing game called NetHack. He literally sunk thousands of hours into that game. I have never seen anyone play a game that much. And eventually he got so curious about the inner workings of the game that he actually decompiled it to find out its secrets. Maybe he could learn a few extra things like how to survive being hit by a wand of death. Now, stuff like this may seem complex to most people, but to him it just made sense. And it made sense in a way that the rest of the world really didn't. The rest of the world doesn't follow those simple, predictable rules of computer programs. And as he got older, he withdrew more and more from that world that he didn't understand and spent more and more time alone with his computers. So, after I found out he had emphysema, I couldn't listen to Cats in the Cradle without bursting into tears. For those who don't know the lyrics of the song, I'm not going to sing it, it's okay. It's basically the story of a father and son who go their whole lives without ever really forming a close bond. And then ultimately the son becomes the father, and he becomes that same detached father figure to his own child. And it really just struck a little too close to home. So, that song really gets me every time I hear it. Fact of the matter is that it was a bit of a wake-up call hearing about the emphysema, and but for that news, that song might as well have been about us. But life saw fit to give us a second chance, a chance to rekindle a relationship that had long since grown cold, and a chance to really make the most of things. And emphysema is, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a horrible way to die. Basically, your lungs get weaker and weaker. It gets harder and harder to breathe. You essentially suffocate over years until the heart or the respiratory system gives in. But it has one silver lining, and that's that it's slow. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess. But basically, the doctor said, yeah, my dad might have 10 years left to live. And I thought, a decade, that's a lot of chances to make up for lost time. But if there's one thing that is more effective at reuniting family than news of a terminal illness, it's news of a second, more aggressive terminal illness. As we sadly discovered when my father was re-diagnosed, and the new prognosis was emphysema and inoperable lung cancer. And his new life expectancy was 1 year. And I thought, shit, that's not a lot of time. I had a wife and a job. There was all sorts of duties that I had, so I couldn't go down every weekend. I thought maybe I can squeeze in 20 trips before the end. But he lived in Coffs Harbour, and that's a 5-hour drive each way. So you really lose a day for each trip, which meant just 20 days. 20 days left with someone you love. And that's not a lot of chances to make up for lost time. And so really, Cats in the Cradle fucks me up every time I hear it. And you would be amazed how many times it comes on the radio in 200 hours of driving too. For me now, that song is inextricably linked to my memories of my father's final days, of looking down at him in the bed in the hospice. And, he's not even recognisable. He looks like a prisoner of war. All his muscle has gone, and his skin's hanging from his bones, and his eyes are sunken into the sockets, and they're almost soulless. He doesn't recognise who you are anymore. Emphysema would have been a horrible way to die, but that was worse. And, these days when I look down at my 3-year-old's face, I wonder if one day he's going to have to watch me waste away and die as well. which is something to think about anytime you suck on a cancer stick. But this is all getting a bit dark, so let's talk about my 3-year-old for a bit, lighten the mood. So he is absolutely adorable. He's just getting to this age where he knows who he is, and he's getting the words to express himself and really, get out there and interact with the rest of the world. And he has this fantastic fascination with how things work. He loves to take everything apart. Doesn't matter if you can't get it back together again. It's just to understand how it all fits together. And he's this amazing little trickster who'll tell you that the sky's red or the trees are pink or dad's a girl. I actually thought he was colourblind. I genuinely thought that until that last one. He's also recently become obsessed with the number 3. Everything is about that, like, look Dad, 3 bicycles, or I just ate 3 chocolates, or Dad, I've got 3 hands. I'm like, no son, that's just the normal 2, but close. Anyway, that number is just so important to him. He repeats it like a mantra. It's more important than it being mathematically correct. He's just saying it. So I guess at least he'll be happy when he starts school and gets a 3 out of 10 for maths. But there's times in my life when I wish that things were as simple for me as they are for a 3-year-old, where your biggest concern is learning to share, or losing your snuggly, or pooping your pants. We did get back there. But life doesn't give you being 3 again. Life gives you 20 days left with your dad. And this was something that I really had to face up to, I guess. Luckily, I'm blessed with this skill, and maybe it's even a superpower. I call it improbable optimism. I can look at the most despairing situation and still somehow find hope. So I looked at the time I had left with my dad, and I said, right, I'm going to rekindle this relationship that we once had, and I'm going to make some perfect memories, and if life throws me any more fucking lemons, I'm going to stick them so fucking far up life's ass that they're going to be in the cavity where life's fucking heart should be. I may have had some anger management issues at the time. Apparently anger is the second stage of grieving. But the third stage is bargaining, and that's where I departed from the Kubler-Ross model completely. Instead, I became obsessed with this concept of perfect memories, and like father, like son, I became obsessed with the concept of 3. I was going to make 3 perfect memories with my father before he died, and I was going to put them in a poem, something that would outlive anyone who knew him in person, something that could cheat mortality. But it turned out that perfect memories are a little harder to make than I first thought. So, when my dad was first diagnosed with cancer, the doctor said to him, if you want to do any travelling, you need to do it as soon as possible. And we wasted no time. We booked a cruise together. It wasn't really either of our thing, but he was getting weak already, and it seemed the best way to allow him to get out there and do some travel. And it was on the aft of that cruise ship, standing at the railing, that the first perfect moment happened. We were in French Polynesia, which is this beautiful archipelago. If you do ever go travelling anywhere, totally recommend it. And the ship was sailing away from Huahine, where we'd spent the day. Sun was setting behind the island. It's this beautiful vista, almost beautiful enough to forget the seconds slipping by. But the thing that really did it for me, that made that moment perfect, was seeing the smile on his face. It was just perfect, absolutely serene moment on his face. Big smile from ear to ear. And maybe it was because we just learned that Huahine means vagina in the native tongue. But I prefer to think that it was actually him being taken back to a previous time in his life, an all too brief time at sea crewing ships. And he said of that period of his life that he never felt more alive than when he was at sea. And just now, as life was being stolen away from him, he got to taste that again. The salt in his face, and the wind blowing his hair around, and just nothing but freedom as far as the eye can see in every direction. That moment stretched on forever, but then just like that it was gone. The sun had set below the sea, we went inside for dinner. Perfect moment was over. It was months before the next one, and I was really beginning to worry that it wouldn't happen. Exercise was getting difficult for my dad. Nevertheless, I persuaded him to come out of the house with me. We drove up to Boambi Headland near Coffs Harbour, near where he lived, And there's this walk you can do there where you go down the hill and then there's this pedestrian passage under a rail bridge, and it's all covered in graffiti and it feels like an earthquake when the trains go overhead. But you step down off the other side and there's just this beautiful white sand goes out to the ocean. And between that sandy spit and the headland, Boambi Creek meets the ocean, and there's a natural spot there where fish tend to get caught by the tides. Usually as a result it's full of fishermen wearing their old man hats and their thermoses and their fishing rods, but for some reason that day we had the beach completely to ourselves. And as we stood there with the wet sand welling between our toes, we saw something truly beautiful. There was these dolphins, 2 dolphins, and they were frolicking in the creek, and I mean clearly fishermen might not have been there, but the fish clearly were, because they were zipping back and forth and catching their fill of fish. And my dad and I just stood there staring at this in shared silent wonderment. I didn't want that moment to end. It had been too long since the last one. But eventually, after 20 minutes, my dad said, "My legs are getting stiff, can we go?" And I said, "Sure, Dad, let's go home." I didn't know it at the time, but that was the last perfect memory that I would get with my dad. Soon after, the cancer took a turn for the worse. It was sudden and brutal. It got into his brain and they found him wandering the streets with no idea who he was. They put him into a nursing home in a place called Bellingen. It's just like this little hippie township. It's up in this verdant valley just inland from the coast. Really beautiful area, and you know, he was well cared for there. The nurses were friendly and they gave him the medication that he needed, but you just don't get perfect memories in a place that only one person is going to walk out of. And the first time that I drove home from seeing him at that hospice, I pulled up again on Boambi Headland and I burst into tears. I was this whirlpool of emotion. I was devastated to see my father like that. He didn't even recognise me. He looked so much sicker than even just 2 weeks ago when I'd seen him before. And I felt foolish that I thought life was going to give me more time with him, more chances to get those perfect memories. And I felt ashamed that somehow in something that was really his suffering, I'd made it all about me. We held his service there and we scattered his ashes in Boambi Creek. So maybe nowadays he's in the dolphins, or maybe he washed halfway across the ocean to Huahine, or maybe he's just gone. I don't know, but what I do know is that but for that news and that second chance to spend time with him, that song, Cats in the Cradle, could just so easily have been the story of our lives. And even though, you know, I didn't get my 3 perfect stories because life's not a poem and cancer isn't as mathematically generous as my son, I got that chance to rekindle an old relationship, and I got the chance to say goodbye. And that's a beautiful thing in itself that makes all that pain and anguish worth it. But above all, I take the lessons that I got from those 20 days with my dad and I apply them to every single moment that I get with my son, to make the most of every day and to keep an eye out for those perfect memories and to really snatch them when they happen, catch them fleeting like a lucid dream. Maybe this time I'll get enough for a poem, maybe even a whole anthology, or maybe those memories are just for me and my son. Maybe we're not meant to be immortal. Maybe we're actually all just atoms that think we're human for one beautiful, perfect moment before we're scattered to the wind. Thank you.
Speechless.